Thanks, Tammy, for the reminder to record. I always forget. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that poll. So just give it a minute, and everybody should be able, in a minute, to be able to see everybody's responses. All right, so it looks like the majority of us either collaborate on a weekly basis, which is awesome. And what else is the next highest we got here? Quarterly. Okay, so there's some collaboration going on, which is really great. So we'd like for you to kind of keep this in mind while you reflect on the quote that we're going to share with you on the next slide. So thinking about how often you collaborate with the ELD or the math specialist at your school or your district, we're going to ask that you reflect on this quote. So what resonates with you or what jumps out at you from this quote? And feel free to let us know in the chat. So what resonates with you? Samantha said sustained collaboration. Absolutely. John said expanding content knowledge is always on your PDP. That's awesome. What else? Collaboration, merging expertise, coordinating educational experiences. Both experts increase their expertise, absolutely. Collaboration is essential to meet the needs of RMLs, definitely. Each teacher contributes. We all bring something to the table, 100%. Contribution, collaboration, teamwork. I love everything that you're pointing out, because I think that what many of you shared is exactly what we're going to be talking about today, right? We really hope that you'll be able to do just that. See how we can learn from one another to really grow each other's expertise and really to support one another as we work towards supporting multilingual learners or MLs in their academic progress. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and jump in. I'm going to turn it over to Marshall to talk about the ELD standards, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
All right, thanks, Stacy. So before we talk collaboration, let's get to know the ELD standards first. And so we're going to go through that. All right. So what you see here is, I'd say our standards, but that means the ELD standard course study. So our standards, and they are anchored by what we call the 4 big ideas. And these 4 ideas support educational experiences that are student-centered, they're culturally and linguistically relevant, and they're responsive to multilingual learners' strengths and needs. And this comes from the WIDA 2020 edition. So what we like to first start take a look at is the equity of opportunity and access, right? So that first box there, right? And so we all understand that English learners come from a wide range of cultural, linguistic, academic, and socioeconomic backgrounds, and that our students have rich and wonderful assets that all educators must leverage to increase equity in our system. And so that, in a nutshell, is one of the first of the 4 big ideas, the equity of opportunity to access. The second big idea is the integration of content and language, right? It's that second box to the right, which will be one of our focuses for today. As every ESL teacher can attest, our multilingual learners develop content and language concurrently with academic content as a context for language learning, and language as a means for learning academic content. So there's that that collaboration and that cross path that you'll see there. And so, like I said, that's the second big idea. The third big idea is collaboration among stakeholders. And this is why we've invited both language and math educators today to join us. Stakeholders, all stakeholders of our multilingual learners or English learners. So those are interchangeable for this particular presentation. So these stakeholders have different areas of expertise, and it's critical that these perspectives all have a voice at the table, because collectively we're all responsible for the success of multilingual learners, like we discussed earlier. And so we hope that these standards and the resources we're sharing with you today can either start or deepen a more collaborative conversation. And like I said, that's that third box there. The last box, the fourth idea, is the functional approach to language development. And it speaks to the idea that explicit teaching and how language works can help multilingual learners expand what they can do with language. So like all students, using a functional approach to language, multilingual learners will become increasingly aware and strategic in their use of language to negotiate meaning. So a very important idea there, that sort of functional approach in making it really fit with the students.
The two big ideas that we're going to be focusing on today are those ones that you see there circled in blue.
Absolutely. All right. So as a note to some of you who may be seeing this for the first time, Standard 1, Language, Social, and Instructional Purposes, wraps around the other standards and is always integrated into each of them. You'll notice integration is a key piece to a lot of the things that's done with the ELD standards. So the framework of the ELD standards consists of the four components you see here. The ELD standards, we have key language uses, language expectations, and proficiency level descriptors. And these components are like building blocks of language development and range from broad to narrow in scope. And they work together to make a comprehensive picture of language development. So today's focus, for obvious reasons, will be Standard 3, you see there in the middle, the language for mathematics, and Standard 1, of course, language for social and instructional purposes. And we'll be thinking about the language you may use for instruction. All right. So in order to be able to understand the resources we'll share today and the connections that they illustrate, we must first take a quick look at the ELD objectives found in the North Carolina ELD framework. The language objectives in the framework are called language expectations. Now, the language expectations set goals for content-driven language learning, and they add specificity to the ELD standard statements and the key language uses. And it makes the language associated with the content areas visible, right? And so the ELD standards, which is represented in the blue box, is the general statement that designates the content area language, that's being focused upon. In this case, of course, math. Next, you have the grade level cluster, and that's shown. And in this case, it's 6-8, right? And so the standards are divided into kindergarten first, second through third, fourth through fifth, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12, I should say. And these are grade span clusters. And so, like I said here, this language expectation addresses grades 6 through 8. Next is the key language use. And the language expectations designate a key language use, right? So key language uses are one of the organizing features of the new standards that help connect content and language. So the key language uses, well, they are the most prominent uses of language found in the K-12 content standards. There are 4 key language uses. We have narrate, inform, explain, and argue. The designated key language use for this language expectation is explain. We will explore these more later in the session. And then the final element of the language expectation is the mode of communication. And so this supplies the way that language is used in the objective. And of course, this one is interpretive. All right, so let's take a closer look at that communication mode we just mentioned. There are two modes of communication. We have interpretive and expressive. The interpretive mode of communication involves using listening and viewing and then reading to interpret and understand language. The expressive mode, on the other hand, of communication involves using speaking, writing, and then representing to express ideas or produce language. All right. These communication modes highlight that students communicate through listening, speaking, reading, and writing, but they also communicate through gestures, facial expressions, images, equations, maps, symbols, and other means. So within each standard, there are both interpretive and expressive modes of communication. And they're noted in the standard after the language function. So for example, it'll say interpretive, and that's going to be, like I said, your receptive mode, which is your listening, reading, and viewing. And then, like I said, you'll have your expressive or productive mode, and that's your speaking, writing, and representing. All right, so interpretive and expressive modes of communication naturally integrate and overlap with one another because they reinforce one another. So looking at the following, let's see if we can identify which math tasks are interpretive and which are expressive or both.
So for that first one, counting aloud to 100 by ones, let us know in the chat if you think that's interpretive or you think that's expressive. So Marshall, I think everybody's saying expressive. Okay, we'll show you the answers in just a bit.
That's right.
What about that next one? Using the properties of exponents to write expression into equivalent forms. Expressive, yeah, right? Because of that writing. What about that next one? Determining if functions are linear or nonlinear. Yeah, because you have input coming in, okay? What about explaining reasoning?
Yeah, this is great because it really helps your understanding as you go in further into this, that you've already got a good grasp of
Yeah.
the modes of communication.
I love how Raquel put talking in parentheses, definitely. So it could be talking, it also could be writing. What about that last one? Drawing an array model and explaining how it connects to a standard algorithm. I mean, what do you think, Marshall? I think they're kind of experts in expressive and interpretive.
I know. I think that's fantastic.
And I apologize for the lag, but the answer should be popping up in just a minute. There's a little bit of a lag with internet.
I see it on my end.
Okay, good.
Fantastic.
So you can see the answers there. So you've got counting aloud is expressive. Using the properties of exponents would definitely be interpretive, but then writing that expression is expressive. Determining would be interpretive. Explaining would be expressive. Drawing and explaining would be expressive. So it seems like everybody did a pretty good job.
Absolutely. Fantastic. So now that we've given you an overview of the ELD standards themselves, let's focus more on standard 3. And by that, what we mean by the language of math. All right. And so the key language uses that you see here that we mentioned earlier describe prominent ways that language is used in school across all disciplines. When educators make choices about how to integrate content and language, the key language uses can help provide focus and coherence. The key language uses share some common aspects across disciplines, and yet each discipline has, or has the ability to have unique ways of applying each. And so what you see on this slide are brief definitions of each of these key language uses. And so each of these are critical to developing our students' ability to communicate effectively in English. And so we have narrate, inform, and argue, right? And then explain there. All right. Let's look at these language uses as being prominently used in math. So you look at these math standards and what is the language that multilingual learners need to master when they look at the math standards. So let's take a look at this one here. All right. So using estimation strategies to assess reasonableness of answers. Model and explain how the relationship between addition and subtraction can be applied to solve addition and subtraction problems. Okay. And then use expanded form to decompose numbers and then find sums and differences. All right.
So based on the I guess the parts of the standard that are in blue, what would you say is the key language use for those? So looking at that first bullet, use estimation and assess. What key language use do you think that would fall under? And again, you can just let us know in the chat. So I see explain. Definitely, you could definitely argue explain. If they're assessing reasonableness, what else could it possibly fall under? Yeah, I was thinking that too, Charlene and Fabiola. Yeah, I see a lot of argue. So we could definitely see how it could be explain, how it could be argue. What about model and explain? What key language uses do you think those would be? Model and explain. It could be inform. The explaining could be argue, right? Depending on what you're asking them to do. I like Luke that you and Denise that you mentioned narrate, right? Because as teachers, we even do that. When we're modeling, we're narrating our thinking, we're narrating what it is that we're doing. Definitely, I could definitely see that. And then what about that last one? Use expanded form, decompose. What key language uses do you think that would fall under?
Yeah, I think this is great because it's important to see how you're answering, because it's something we wanted to point out is that you notice that that the illustration is like a Venn diagram, right? So therefore, even though, for example, maybe the verb might be explain, another key language use may be present as well. And so I think that we're seeing that across the board here.
Definitely. Is there anything else you want to mention here, Marshall?
Yeah, let's see. So, for example, in the course of explaining how to solve an addition or subtraction problem, you may also need to inform students about how to line up numbers correctly, right? And so there's different ways that cross those boundaries, and that's the reason why, like we said, we wanted to point out that it's like a Venn diagram in that regard, right? Because they may have multiple pieces there. All right, so let's see if we can identify the key language uses multilingual learners might need to master this math standard.
I'm glad that you noticed that, John. So this is a little bit different. Now we're looking at the math standard and we're determining what are the key language uses of math here. Ooh, you see what you've got in the chat, Marshall? So we've got compare, reasoning.
Fantastic.
recognize. Definitely. Anything else? Using. I'm glad that you pointed that out, Liz.
Yeah, reasoning, fantastic. Yeah, I see that we see, quite a few here. This is fantastic.
So it looks like everybody hit the nail on the head, Marshall.
I know. And so as all of you, have shown here, that in many content standards, the connection may not be so explicitly shared, right? And so in these math standards, the verb does not explicitly match, one of the four language uses sometimes, right? Therefore, it's important to really understand, each of these key language uses so that the connections between language and the content can be made, planned, and then integrated into lessons. All right. So what we want to show here is that words can have multiple meanings, not only in English, but to the student and their culture and language. And so the first thing we want to take a look at is when we use the word model, what are some different meanings that multilingual learners might take from this? And so we have here a couple of different pictures to help begin the thought process. And so we have that first picture that looks like a model, and then the second picture, which looks like a model. So two words that are two pictures that are model that have the same word, but different meanings. So that's one of our first ones that were popping up there, right? I think they call them polysemous words, right? So the next one we have is area. So when you think of area, here we have a picture of, like a landscape, and then a picture of like a nice room in someone's house, possibly, right? Once again, a polysemous word. And problems, when we think of problems, okay, well, that first one, I think, with the flooding, I think we're seeing that right now in some places in Florida, right? And then there's an argument between a couple, so maybe a problem there. And that last one, it looks like the equal sign, right? Well, one thing I want to point out there is that the equal sign in the language of Japanese is actually the number 2. And so that's how they write the number 2, or ni, as they say it in Japanese. Something just to be aware of, that there are multiple meanings, not just for the words, but also for symbols. And that students coming from different cultures and languages are bringing different meanings and definitions and assets with them.
I think that's a great point, Marshall. I think one of the biggest takeaways for this, especially with multilingual learners, is that if you know that there are multiple meanings to a particular word, you might want to follow it up with some sort of visual, right, or concrete example that multilingual learners can kind of refer to make sure that they really understand exactly what it is that you're referring to. So now that Marshall has talked us through what we mean and what we talk about when we think of the language of math, we're going to dig into some resources that might help you make those language and those math connections and translate them into your instruction. So the first document that we're going to take a look at is actually the mapping document for Standard 3, which is language for math. I will say that all of the mapping documents, including the one for math or ELD Standard 3, are located in our ELD Standards Resource Hub under this icon. And Marshall, if you wouldn't mind just throwing that link in the chat for everybody, that would be great. And just to kind of give you some context, so the purpose of this mapping document is really to show the connections between the ELD standards and the language expectations and the content standards. So in your case, math. So the purpose of this document is really to support the integration of the ELD language expectations, which we've been talking about this entire time, and integrating that into content to support MLs in their learning. So in this webinar, we're obviously focusing on math. So let's just kind of look at a snapshot of that document for math just to familiarize ourselves with the format. So that first column of the document contains the language expectation, or that ELD standard, right? So remember that language expectation is coded to show that ELD standard, the grade span, the key language used, the communication mode. And then the columns to the right are the grade level content standards that are connected to that language expectation. So the purpose is, by seeing these side by side in these documents, we really hope that that can help language and math educators as they collaborate to develop and align their curriculum, or plan integrated instruction, or even support co-teaching if that's something that you do. So we're going to look a little bit closer at this same snapshot from the mapping document for math. So looking across these columns, what connections do you see between the ELD standards and the math standards? Let us know in the chat. What connections do you see between the ELD standards and math standards just by looking at this snapshot? And again, if you can't see that very well, if you just access the slide deck, you should be able to kind of zoom in a little bit easier. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that link in the chat again for you. So if you go to that link and you make sure you look at slide 22, you should be able to look at it a little bit closer. So explaining with that first standard, Kelly said students express the math standards through their English language development. Yes, I love how you put that. Thank you for the tip, Lacola. Describing steps, model and explain. They express their understanding through their English development. Yes, they express math standards via the ELD standards. I love that. Anything else? What about, for those of you who might be elementary educators, how do you maybe see some of these standards that are connected? How might they be integrated? Or how do you integrate them? Ooh, Kelly, I like that you mentioned vocabulary and math literacy. How might they be integrated? So Krista said writing and discussions across the curriculum, for sure. You're right. Yes, writing could definitely be used. It's not necessarily elementary, but writing could definitely be used here. Vocabulary development and using SMP stems to develop oral language and math discourse. Discussing vocabulary, English meaning versus math meaning. Oh, I like that. Gives the very specific academic vocabulary and tells you the how, for sure. Yeah, definitely keep those coming. Love to hear that, John. Keep those coming. We're going to actually put you into breakout rooms in just a minute, and you're going to do the same exact thing you just did, but just in small groups. So we're going to give you an opportunity to explore this document a little bit more on your own. So we're going to put you in breakout rooms. Once you get into your breakout rooms, we'd really like for you to select a mapped ELD and math standard from the mapping document. And after you've selected one to look at, we'd like for you to discuss the questions that you see here. So one, what connections do you see between those standards, like we just discussed, and then how might they be integrated, like we just discussed. So we're going to give you a couple minutes in the breakout room, so it's going to be really important that you select that map standard quickly so that you have time to discuss. We're going to go ahead and start the breakout rooms. So let's see, we've got 147. do. Okay, so everybody should have a pop-up come up to invite you to a breakout room. If you would go ahead and accept that and go ahead and jump into your breakout sessions and start. We're going to give you just a couple minutes here.
And I put in the chat the link to the mapping document.
Awesome. I'll put the directions in the chat for everyone as well. If you're still in the main room, it's because you haven't accepted the invitation to the breakout session. So just take a look at your desktop. You should have a pop-up that just popped up. Marshall, I'm sort of back on, but it says that the breakout rooms are going to close in about 10 seconds or so.
There we go. Yeah, I see you, and I just made you host again. There we go.
Likewise.
I guess if the kids were interpreting and analyzing, it could be a good time to practice speaking skills too. So, um, on the access test, there are usually some math problems that have area or volume or perimeter or something like that, and students have to use math vocabulary. So that could be a great opportunity to practice that math vocabulary orally.
Right. They could work in groups or pairs and talk about how would they solve the problem, things like that.
Right, right.
All right, everyone. Looks like we're back from the breakouts. Looks like Stacy had lost power for just a minute, but she's back on. Does anyone need the link to the slide deck before we go on? I'll just go ahead and put that in there anyway. Into the chat. All right.
I'm so sorry. Are we allowed to ask questions verbally, or would you rather those be in the chat?
I guess you can put it in the chat, and then that way, we'll have it, and that way we can get back to it for sure if we need to as well.
Awesome. Yes, sir. I'll do that.
Yeah, it says, is it being recorded? Yes. And so we'll have that recorded, and then we'll paste that onto a couple different sites, and we'll let everybody know where that is, where it's been put, and we'll share it with our math colleagues for them to share out as well.
All right, Marshall, I think everybody's back if you want to go ahead and start with unpacking.
That sounds good. All right. So now that we've looked at the mapping document, we'll take a look at our next resource, which is the unpacking document, which can help us with ideas for incorporating and integrating language into math. So all of the unpacking documents, grades K-12, are located, on the North Carolina ELD Standards Resource Hub under this icon, which looks like a box that you're unpacking. So, all right. So let's talk about how the unpacking documents, or the purpose, I should say, of these documents. And it's to increase student achievement by providing access to rich standards-based grade level content by ensuring that all educators have a clear understanding of the expectations of the adopted standards. And they include clarifications for each of the bullets of the language expectations, unpacked language functions, in the classroom ideas, and a sample integrated language / content objective. So those are all in the purpose of our unpacking document. So we're going to take a tour here. So let's talk about how the unpacking documents are formatted. At the top, you'll see the ELD standard, 1 of 5. In this case, it's 3. Next, bordered in green, you'll see the language expectation, which may have several bullet points. Each of these, bordered in a lighter teal color, is clarified under the heading Skills to help expound on the meaning of the expectation. There's also the unpacked language functions, and they show the breakdown of what students need to understand specifically. To the right, the heading In the Classroom gives a classroom scenario and a sample objective when applying the standard to instruction. On the right side, look at the section bordered in pink. This gives a glimpse of how this could be applied in the classroom. Then you have the sample language objective bordered in purple. I hope you like all the colors. And this is to show you how you could post, the objective, for that lesson, right? And then, of course, these are just samples and examples. There's endless possibilities of how the standards could be applied, but just kind of helps to get the, creative juices flowing and to see how connections can be made. All right. So using the unpacking, right? So you can use the unpacking to determine possible language supports. So what language supports do you see in this unpacking example?
And again, if you want to look at it a little more closely, on the slide deck, it's slide 28. So again, what language supports do you see in the classroom example? So Marshall, we've got some answers. Kelly says sentence frames, pictures, sample language objective is helpful. Someone said keywords, Aurelia, sentence frames, modeling, visual supports, concrete images, visuals.
Fantastic. Yeah, for those of you who may not be familiar, realia, the term realia means concrete, real world examples, so that they can use, or they can picture in essence, like what is meant. Sometimes you think of like tiny plastic foods and things like that. Yeah, those are some examples of realia. Right, you see the practice expression. So practicing using language to peers, for example, hearing models from others. You'll also see the language structure in there. So language structure provides, oh, there's a breakup, sorry. Allows them to focus on content, without getting lost in the language. So that's where language structure allows them to do. You can also use the unpacking to see how grade level math content is integrated. Where do you see the math content represented? Excellent. Absolutely. Yeah, lots of different possibilities there. The figures, so the vocabulary, the shapes. Yep. Fantastic.
So
Everyone's putting-
Marshall, for this next one, we were going to have you all jump in another breakout room to do the same thing you did last time, but this time with the unpacking. But looking at the time, I think we probably should move on.
Yeah.
Discussion question.
All right. So, based on what's been discussed, what can we do to enhance multilingual learners' access to grade level mathematical content? So you all could ponder on that and reflect a little bit and write in the chat some of your ideas. Discuss vocabulary, word walls, More vocabulary, absolutely. Sentence frames, partner conversations. Language objectives. Wow, I see. Yeah, I see lots of great things popping up here.
And I love that everyone's saying all of these things. No one's saying lower the mathematical content, like lower the rigor, right? So you want to keep that grade level of rigor and then think of all of those language supports that you can provide your multilingual learners to make sure that you give them access to that grade level rigor. Definitely, Kelly. So now that we've had a chance to kind of explore the mapping, the unpacking documents, we're going to put all of the pieces together to see how you might be able to use this as you work to integrate or connect ELD and math, or as you work to collaborate with your colleagues. I'm going to try and keep my camera on for this, but forgive me if my internet decides to go out. So just like we did earlier in the session, we'd like for you to take a moment to reflect on what we discussed so far and look at this math standard. What language will multilingual learners need to meet the expectations of this standard? So what language will MLs need to meet the expectations of this math standard? Language for arguing or language for justifying. They're going to need to know what rate of change is. Definitely, Naomi. Appropriate. It could be Luke, but it also could be maybe there's vocabulary in there that you need to talk about, or what might they need support with in terms of interpretation or expression when it comes to this math standard. Linear, exponential, intervals. Definitely. Models of functions, for sure. Tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary, definitely. So just kind of like almost as an answer key, I guess. So all the things that you see that are underlined, that's language that's going to be needed to express identifying, right? Or language that's needed to make a justification. And what you see in purple is that math specific language, whether it's tier 2 or tier 3, right? They're going to need to know what those mean in the context of math. And then what you see in black and in bold are those words that have multiple meanings that you might need to be aware of, right? Those things that we kind of talked about earlier. So knowing that this is the language that they need to master this math standard, let's look at what specific language standards that this may work with and support the mastery of this particular standard. So here's where we go back to the mapping document for this particular standard. So here's that math standard we just looked at. What connections do you see between this and that ELD standard? How do you think they might be integrated to support MLs? I love that, Melanie, that you explain the math words to all of the students, but maybe it's the other words that are maybe multiple meaning words, those tier 2 words, or even maybe, you know, those tier 1 words that are basic vocabulary where you can just, you know, tell them, give them a concrete example. Identify pictures of linear functions, identified and exponential functions. I love that you pointed out that you could definitely use a visual aid. Because keep in mind, especially if your student is a newcomer, they may have already done some of this math content in their home language.
I don't.
So giving them that visual might, you know, activate that prior knowledge. Model, 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 point, repeat. I love that. Sentence frames, okay. Provide explanations, for sure. Total physical response. What other connections do you see in terms of how these two standards might be integrated? Frere model, I love that, Connie. Vocabulary bank, yes, that can be very helpful. So tier 2 words are definitely going to be, those tier 2 and tier 3 words are going to be based on whatever your local curriculum has. So I can actually put this resource in the chat for you. But if you've ever used Achieve the Core's academic word finder, you can actually copy and paste any text in there, and it'll pull out all of the tier 2 words or the academic vocabulary for you, and then it sorts it by grade level.
What?
Let me find that while other people put in the chat. So I see graphic organizer. Have students partner to create models and explain with supports like word walls, sentence frames, word banks. Awesome. Have the students teach each other. Yes, there's nothing wrong with them using their heritage language. I just put the link in the chat to that academic word finder if that's helpful. So keeping these connections in mind, let's see what we can find in the unpacking document that can support the connections that we made. Some of you already kind of mentioned those, but looking at this unpacking for this same ELD standard and this that was mapped to that math standard that we just looked at, what language supports do you see that could be used with this standard? Definitely, Sylvia. Glad that you're with us this afternoon, by the way. So again, those sentence frames for sure. What else? What other language supports do you see? Peer groups, sentence starters. There's one right at the beginning. I don't know if anybody saw that one. Definitely multiple representations and drawings. Graphic representations. Okay, so definitely saw those multiple representations. You can see practicing orally with peers. You can also see those sentence frames. So now, what grade level math content could be substituted in this classroom, in the classroom idea, to fit that standard that we were just looking at? All of them? Okay. Possible solutions. And these are just ideas too, right? I mean, if you think about it, like if those sentence frames don't work with a particular standard, there's always a way that you can develop your own and provide it for them. All right, because of time, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of point out what the grade level content was in this unpacking document that you possibly could have substituted for that particular standard that we were looking at. So we hope that this kind of gave you some practice with how you could use these documents to support those language and those math connections. But we also wanted to share some additional language supports that are specific to math that may not necessarily be explicitly included in the resources that we shared. So we know there's quite a bit on this slide, but in what ways do you maybe see some of these language supports being used in the math classroom? Especially when I hear from you math folks. What ways do you maybe see these language supports being used in your classroom? translating symbols into words, visual cues, anchor charts, manipulatives for sure, visuals and pictures. It's great. Oh, you're welcome, Nicola. I'm glad it's helpful. Anchor charts, awesome. Academic conversations, pre-teaching vocabulary. I like that idea, Jennifer. That's great. Yeah, keep those coming, because if you think about it too, if there's anything that anyone puts in the chat, you're always welcome to save that. So one other thing that we kind of want you to think about is that in addition to those language supports for math that we shared on that previous slide, we also want to highlight the supports that could be used to support and grow that math expertise of language educators. So here you've got the mathematical practices. Tammy and Joe, I didn't know if there was anything that you wanted to share more specifically about these before we have everybody take a look at them.
Hey, yeah, the standards for mathematical practice, they are based upon what you should see students doing in the classroom. And so as you read that, you should be saying, yeah, students are making sense of problems and persevere in solving them. So these are student actions that you should be in the seeing in the classroom.
And also, I wanted to add, I'm sorry, I lost power. I'm on my phone. So if I break up, I apologize. But also, when you're looking at the mapping document, sometimes the standards might not seem that they match completely. But when you think about the SMPs, that's where you will see the alignment through the SMPs with construct and argue.
What are the SMPs?
Say again.
Do you have a question, Kathy?
What are SMPs?
Standards for mathematical practice. So
And
what you see on this slide, I'm going to drop the link in the chat for you.
And also in any math unpacking document, it is one of the first sheets that you'll see, one of the first pages that you'll see in our unpacking documents. We list our 8 mathematical practices for students.
Yeah, and it's one other important thing to note is that the standards for mathematical practice are adopted by the state board as part of the standards for the classroom. So these standards for mathematical practice you see here are just as important to the mathematical classroom as the content standards themselves.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. So I just put the link in the chat to the SMPs. Go ahead and take a look at that, or if you want to just look at them from the slide, you are more than welcome to do that. But definitely want to hear from you language folks. In what ways do you see these being used in tandem with the language support that you provide? So we've got model with mathematics, we have making sense of problems and persevere in solving them, reasoning abstractly and quantitatively. Naomi, finding patterns. Okay, Chrissy said, we use SMPs daily and explicitly as students move through the lesson, launch, explore, discuss. They provide content area guides who apply to the language standards. Oh, I love the way that you put that. Joe, Tammy, I don't know if you saw the question in the chat, but Jill is asking, are the SMPs for all grades?
Yes, they are for all grades. You'll see them on every unpacking document for math.
And in high school for all of the courses.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, well, because of time, we're going to go ahead and move on. We've shared quite a bit of information with you today, so we're going to ask that you kind of just digest some of this information. So here's our reflection question for today. What is going to be your first next step in supporting MLs with math content And how can we better collaborate with one another? So Kelly said, looking deeper at the ELD standards alignment with content standards for your grade. Sharing these ideas with other colleagues, definitely. Just sharing this and letting them know it's available is a great start, Alyssa. Anchor charts, modeling, bringing this into PLTs, using the mapping and unpacking to collaborate and plan with your teachers, creating spiraling activities for repetition. See lots about PLCs and coaching, that's great. Finding activities for multiple meaning words. Love that, Tracy. Lots of things about sharing this with PLCs. That's a great place to start. Definitely. Yeah. Don't be afraid to reach out to your ML teachers. They're experts in language, you're experts in content. Dream team if you work together. So just a few other things that we kind of want to point out to you is that you can continue the conversation on Go Open and See if you'd like. We have the PowerPoint there as well as the discussion questions that we talked about, but you can join the teacher network on Go Open and See. We've got almost 400 members who kind of weigh in and just chat asynchronously, and you're welcome to join that. Any teacher of multilingual learners, so that also includes our content area teachers, can join. Also, speaking of word of mouth, we have other sessions like these for the other content areas coming up. So we've got social studies has 2 sessions actually in October. We've got science coming up in November, and then ELA we have coming up in January. So please encourage your colleagues to register if they haven't already, because this is a really great way for all of us to start talking about how we can support our multilingual learners through incorporating those ELD standards. One last thing before you go, we would love your feedback. This helps us kind of revise and inform the PD that we provide. So we'd love to hear what you learned from this session today. If there was anything that we could have improved upon, please indicate that in the evaluation, and I'll drop that link in the chat. And that's pretty much it. So here's our contact information. You've got the multilingual learner Title III team, and then you've got the mathematics team there as well. And in case you have any math related questions that you want to ask, there's our contact information. We're going to stay on for just a few more minutes in case there's anybody who has some lingering questions that they want to ask. But otherwise, we hope that you have a great afternoon. Stay dry, stay safe. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely.
Kenya, this is the only one that we have currently scheduled for math. But I'm sure that if there's any questions that you have regarding math or any questions that you have regarding ELD, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, and we're happy to answer those questions. Anytime, Kelly. Thanks for joining us.
And there was a question about, are the others that we're going to be hosting, are they going to be recorded as well in case someone can't attend?
Yes, absolutely. So I see the question about CEUs. Yeah, so if we'll get our attendance report from WebEx, and we'll send that to our colleagues, who will then send you a certificate for today of completion, which you'll then present to your PSU for credit. One thing I will say though is, unfortunately, we do not award certificates for anyone who watches the video after the fact, just for those of you who attended today. Hi, Connie. I'm not sure why that is. If that's not working, maybe just select a random one, and then maybe in the additional comments section, you could just maybe correct what school you're actually from.
Yeah, that's a form of feedback in and of itself.
Yep. Thank you all for joining us. And again, we're going to be on here for a couple more minutes in case any of you have questions, and you're more than welcome to unmute at this point if you'd like.
Hi, I have a question on the Go Open and See. When I try to go to that, and it's asking for a NC Ed Cloud login, but I currently work for a charter school, so I don't necessarily have an NC Ed Cloud account. Is there another way that I could?
All public educators in North Carolina should have access to that. So when you click on that, if it's giving you an issue and you're not able to log in, just email me and then I'm going to see how I can get you in.
Awesome, thanks so much.
Anytime.
There, I had put my question up above and I think you sort of answered it, but I wanted to make sure. I'm an assistant principal and a former math teacher, so I came to this one to support my staff in the area of math. But we're encouraging all of our staff to come to these, but I'm afraid there might be one subject area that we don't have anyone that's able to come to. Will we still be able to get the videos and the links for the ones if no one attends from our building?
100%. So I'm going to drop the link to the ELD hub in the chat for you. All of the recordings for all of the sessions, including the one from today, we'll make sure to include in there as well.
Okay, that sounds great. I'll copy that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, anytime. Just give us a little bit of time. It might take us a couple days to get it
No,
up
it's
there.
okay. Well, this one was hard because I had just gotten the information and we just had our math PLC yesterday and I'm like, it's tomorrow. Don't worry, I'll go to this one. So
Mhm.
Well, thanks for joining us.
you're
Absolutely.
welcome. Thank you for having me.
Hi, I put in the chat. I signed in as a password. Sorry. So I put my name in the chat and my email address so I can get the CEUs. Is that okay?
Yes, it's okay. I'm just afraid that we might miss it and forget. Would you mind actually emailing me
Okay.
just with your name and just so that I know when we send out the certificates that when we see ELD Math 22, we know who to send
Okay.
it to.
Sorry. I was like, I couldn't get in. I couldn't get in at first. I was just trying everything, but I think it's just actually the internet. So that's
No,
why.
you're fine. You're
Okay.
fine.
Thank you very much.
Anytime.
See lots of thank yous. So thank you for the thank yous.
Well, it doesn't look like there are any other questions. Did I miss any?
I don't believe so.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of stop sharing. Let me stop the recording. Actually, Marshall, you might have to stop the recording.
That's what I'm looking at here. Actually, I don't see. Hmm. Yeah, I don't see anywhere to do that.
I don't know if Marshall will be able to do it. He's not a host or a co-host, is he?
I know. I see it just tells me it's recording in progress, but then I don't see anywhere.
Yeah,
Other-
usually the co-host or the host is the only person that could record or start recording. Who started the recording?
Stacy. Maybe when she logs off, it'll automatically
Well, yeah, when we leave, it'll stop.
All right. Well, I think that went quite well.
Yeah, you had lots of attendees, that's for sure.
Yeah, we had over 400 register, so
Mhm.
I'm sure there were some storm related issues with some of the folks for sure.
Mhm. Okay. Well, if you don't need me for anything else, I'm gonna get out of here.
All right.
And
Thanks, Tammy.
you are welcome. Let me know if you need anything.
All righty.
Okay,
Okay,
have a great
everyone.
weekend.
Thanks, you too. So I'm going to
Bye.
go ahead and end the meeting, everyone.
Okay.